Ilya Shapiro is joining me now. He's the director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
Now, former President Donald Trump was impeached for the second time back on January 13th, just 1 week after the deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol. The charges against the president are incitement of insurrection. Can you walk us through what these charges mean exactly, and what will the trial look like now that the president is actually out of office?
Well, it's as you said, it's one count, and it deals with his speech on January 6th to a crowd that was there to protest the allegedly stolen election, and he was kind of whipping them up and saying, the sorts of things that he'd been saying for 2 months after the election, and around the same time. A mob was breaking into the Capitol, and one police officer was killed, and severe damage was done. And obviously, we're still talking about that several weeks later. And so I don't think the Democrats did very well in the way that they drafted this particular article, in part because we've been debating legalisms, because incitement and insurrection are both legal terms of art, and this is not a criminal prosecution. I don't think that whatever the president said, even if it's impeachable, that it would subject him to criminal prosecution. The standard is very high. If he had said, go you people attack this person now, that's inciting violence or inciting insurrection. But what he said was, I do think it was impeachable in general, combined with his overall plan of behavior in terms of spinning out certain conspiratorial lies and things like that, inflaming people, giving them false hope. Things that came out afterwards when they, anyway, I do think the impeachment was warranted, but the way that the article came to be was not ideal, and the political games that the Democrats were playing probably also didn't help gain Republican support. But nevertheless, here we are. He is no longer in office. The Senate just had a vote on the Republicans' motion to dismiss. Rand Paul moved that they dismiss based on the president no longer being in office, kind of a jurisdictional issue. And the Senate voted 55-45 against that motion, with 5 Republicans joining all of the Democrats. So we've been having this discussion about whether the Senate can try a former officer, president or otherwise. There are good arguments on both sides. The Constitution isn't clear about this. But anyway, looks like the Senate will be proceeding. And given that there's so many Republicans that think that they don't have jurisdiction, I think at this point the likelihood of a conviction is very, very low. Of course, that requires 2/3 or 67.
Now, has this ever happened before in U.S. history in terms of a president being out of office and then, being brought back for an impeachment trial?
Not for a president. We've had 4 impeachments in our history. 2 of them were Donald Trump within the last year. But no, all of them were of sitting presidents. Nobody's been convicted. And we have had former officers who were tried. Most recently was 1876, not too recent, but still. The Secretary of War, William Belknap, for various corruption scandals. He ended up resigning, but the House nevertheless impeached him. The Senate similarly had a motion to dismiss. He survived the motion to dismiss, but they did not convict him for various reasons. But it was a majority to convict, but it was not 2/3.
You just brought up, 2/3 are needed in the Senate to convict Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. Do you think there are any Republicans on the fence? And right now they would need 17 Republicans with all of the Democrats in order to convict him. Do you think that's likely?
Well, at this point, we have 45 Republicans on record as saying that the Senate should not be conducting this trial because it has no power to try former officials. It would be a little unusual for someone to say then, well, we don't have the power to do it, but I'll still vote to convict. So I think this is going to go somewhat similar to what happened with William Belknap, the erstwhile Secretary of War. So I certainly don't think there are going to be 12 Republicans who say they had no jurisdiction, but yet are going to vote to convict. So at this point, I guess the Democrats are going to have to think about whether to proceed with the trial at all. or whether I've seen reports maybe they pursue a bipartisan censure motion, which would only require majorities of both houses. So, but either way, look, if they do proceed with the trial, I know that was scheduled for sometime in February after the Senate finishes confirming President Biden's cabinet, and President Trump's lawyers have had time to prepare.
President Trump, or former President Trump, I should say, obviously still has a lot of power and a lot of support within the Republican Party. How much of this impeachment trial will determine the future of the Republican Party?
Yeah, it's hard to say. As Yogi Berra would say, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. He said a little while ago, it's kind of interesting following along his pronouncements because, of course, he's no longer tweeting, he's no longer on Twitter. But he said he made motions to perhaps create another party, the Patriots Party. Then he walked that back and said that it would be just a movement within the Republican Party to primary Republicans who are not supporting him. That sort of thing, kind of like the Tea Party was, I guess. But the Republican Civil War will continue, whatever happens. We saw Rob Portman, Senator Portman of Ohio, announce that he is not going to run for re-election, although he voted that the Senate does not have jurisdiction to try President Trump either. But the way things are going, I think some of the Republicans who aren't very supportive of President Trump, might see themselves not having much of a future. But then again, it depends on the kind of the longer term. If in 2022, it's largely Republican-supported candidates that are running, and the Republican Party doesn't do well in those midterms, well, that will say something. And if they do well, that will say something else. So it's a rapidly changing political environment, to say the least.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always great to have you on. I'd love to have you back as this impeachment trial proceeds, whether Democrats continue with it or if it just gets stopped in its tracks. So thank you so much for joining me today.
I'll just say one more thing, Samantha. The unfortunate thing about this, the way that the Democrats have played this, is to make it as partisan as the first impeachment. And I don't know why they went about scoring political points where they could have actually held a more legitimate seeming process with broader support. This is something that Andy McCarthy has done a good job writing about at National Review. He's generally was a supporter of President Trump's during his administration, but just the way the impeachment happened, he'd say Trump has done impeachable things, but not the way that Democrats have pursued it. So.